Welcome, everyone. We have a pretty big topic to talk about today, and I think if you kind of ever wondered why some influencer programs thrive and others crash and burn, this session was designed for you. We're going to dive into some real data straight from the influencers and marketing teams executing influencer marketing programs, and hopefully at the end, give you an actionable playbook for success. Just really quick, a little bit about me. My name is Ashley Zekman. I'm CEO at Onalytica. I've been in the B2B influencer marketing game for just over 10 years, and I've had the pleasure of working with some of the top brands to build high-impact influencer programs, and I'm here to help you navigate some of the realities of influencer marketing in 2025. Again, a couple things about me. I'm a very proud millennial dog mom. If you've ever seen my Instagram, it's pictures of my food and pictures of my dogs. There's really nothing else. I have the pleasure of leading a team focused on winning influencer strategies. And today we're going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly of B2B influence. So I do want to start by saying that this isn't going to be our standard best practices webinar. This is really more of a reality check. Again, why? Because brands are still making the same mistakes year after year. But we want to go through what's holding them back, what's not working. And by the end of the session, I want you to know what's working and what's not, what influencers really think about brand collaborations, how to align your strategy that actually drives impact. And all of that data we're digging into today is based on our 2025 industry and influencer surveys, which, by the way, this is the first time anyone other than myself has seen this data. So I'm curious to know what all of you think about it. And as Stephanie mentioned, please don't forget to download your workbook. The way that it's designed, you will see if you have never implemented influencer marketing before, there's a section for you. Or if you're just looking to possibly refine your program, there's a different section for you. So again, follow along. I'm going to do my best to pause where we have a few opportunities to write some things down in our notebook. In our workbook, sorry. It is a PowerPoint, so you can just feel free to download, enter everything there. So again, I'm going to be practicing the art of silence, which for me is a struggle. I will do my best. And also, I just wanted to note that this session is for you. So please ask questions throughout, and I'm going to do my best to answer them as we go along. But if I don't get to them, we're definitely going to leave some time at the end. And I see Faith is already a fellow dog lover, so I love that. Welcome, Faith. Okay, so let's get started with our no fluff session. So influencer marketing is it a standalone marketing tactic, or is it content and social media marketing? If influencer marketing is just being treated as an add-on, we're not doing it right. Right? So if it's an afterthought, or you feel like it needs to be something that is separate from your content and your social strategy, we're already off to a bad start. The other thing to think about is that some people really feel like influencer marketing is a gamble, right? It might take too much time and effort with little ROI, but the reality is when we do it right, it actually saves time and scales content production in a way that improves performance across the board. The old school thinking is that influencers only help with awareness, but through the last few years, we've seen that influencer marketing can drive impact across the entire funnel, from demand gen to conversions and even customer advocacy. So more brands than ever are jumping into influencer marketing, but the big question is, are they doing it right? So according to our data, so this is our first stat from the new report, 77% of brands say that brand awareness and lead generation are their biggest challenges in 2024, which brings us to our first reality check. Are you ready for influencer marketing? So before we go any further, I want everyone to just take a minute for a quick self-assessment. And again, depending on whether you're new to influencer marketing or your experience, you're going to have a slightly different question in your workbook. But just, again, take a few moments to begin jotting something down and think about your readiness for influencer marketing as part of your marketing strategy. Okay, let's keep going. So, influencer marketing effectiveness. This is pretty great news. 100% of brands surveyed believe that their influencer marketing program is effective, which means no one surveyed believed that their influencer marketing program was ineffective, which is actually a big change from our data last year. I think we had about 65% that felt that they were effective, but now we've made it all the way to 100%. And this year, also, for the first time ever, influencer marketing was ranked #1 alongside content marketing as one of the most effective tactics executed in the past year. Again, that was followed by events, social media, paid media, email marketing, and PR. But the question remains, why are brands still struggling to commit? And, obviously we know not all brands are successfully executing B2B influence marketing, which is why all of you lovely people are here to learn more about it. So even though brands are seeing influencer marketing working, the investment isn't growing fast enough. Every year we see different statistics about the billions of dollars being pumped into influencer marketing. Unfortunately, most of those surveys are related to B2C influencer marketing, right? Where we know tons of money is being spent. But B2B marketers are a bit more cautious, a bit more hesitant. And while some are increasing their budgets, many are keeping their spending the same or even reducing it. And again, this survey took into account enterprise, midsize, and SMB companies. Enterprise, we know, has been hit particularly hard, especially enterprise tech, and has not really recovered the way that we would all like to see it recover. So that's a bit of a tough spot to be in, right? Again, so there has to be something that's happening. There has to be some ROI part of the equation missing, that maybe things aren't working as expected. Which brings us to our next problem, which is what's not working. So when we're thinking specifically about how these brands are collaborating with influencers, 44% are struggling to find the right influencers to partner with. The other top struggles, budget constraints, which again, I'm sure is not news to any of us, managing the relationships and communication, the amount of time it takes to successfully build long-term relationships with influencers, and then measuring ROI. So again, those are the top 4 issues that many marketers are facing. But again, really, one of the things to think about is, why aren't we finding the right influencer partners? What's the obstacles getting in the way for that? So that brings us to our second activity in the workbook. So when you're thinking of your own program or potential program, what matters most to you when you're looking for influencer partners? And I will say, not every person is going to have the same answer, and that's okay. It just has to be based on what your priorities are as a business. So we'll take another little pause here. And Stephanie did ask us a question about how it's tough to sell B2B due to lack of direct link to profit. Again, that's something that we could have a whole separate webinar on, but it's all based on how you design your program. So are you designing tactics and finding influencer partners that are made for lead generation, or you focus on top of funnel content with top of funnel influencers and expecting it to generate leads, right? That's one of the biggest, I think, disconnects that we see. And at the end, I do have, as an FYI, Stephanie, a link to our blueprint, which allows you to fill out some information. And if you are interested in more of a lead gen program, sort of what you need to do to get that buy-in to make that work. I promise silence, but clearly, again, not one of my strong suits. We'll spend just another minute here pausing. Okay. Up next, we are going to talk about the influencer perspective. So we're going to flip the script and get a better understanding of what influencers really want from brand collaborations. So it's important to note that while we have a blend of different influencer types and levels of experience in our report, 67% of them have been working as influencers for 5 years. So we are getting insights from the people who have been doing this for a long time, the OGs, so to speak, of influencers. And again, these are seasoned pros. These aren't people who are new to this. And I just think it's really important to call that out as we are looking at their responses to some of these tough questions. So the good news is, I think for us as B2B marketers, that most influencers believe that the compensation that they're getting from brand collaborations meet their expectations. But it's important to break down what compensation really looks like. So 89% prefer creation and promotion fees. So they want money, right? That is, they want that exchange of value, that monetary value in partnering with brands. Exposure doesn't hold the same weight it used to. I know when I first began in influencer marketing, we talked about how there shouldn't be a budget, that it should just be an exchange of value for exposure, visibility, building thought leadership. And that was the norm 10 years ago, but it's not now. And you'll see this even a little bit later on in the presentation, but that's just becoming less and less valuable to the influencers themselves. So free stuff, okay. Depends on what it is, I guess. A lot of times it can be beta access to a new product or platform, or maybe a annual subscription to a tool they might already use. They're okay with that. They're not too keen on affiliate structures, right? So that means they're getting paid based only on the results that they drive. And again, that's something that we're going to dig a little bit deeper into later on. So there's also a question about, B2B is broad. And I think that's a good point, David. There's a few industries that are ripe for it. There are ones that are more tough. So I'd say, B2B tech, finance, even some other highly regulated industries like healthcare are all primed for influencer marketing. And where it can be a little bit tougher is when you're looking at government or even, aerospace and defense. But I will say that we have even a new client who's in utilities where they have a monopoly on the East Coast, right? So that's a very hyper-targeted sort of customer. So I'd say it applies to most, but there are always obviously exceptions to that rule. So what are some of their biggest icks? What things turn off influencers from working with brands? So remember how on the last slide we talked about how 75% are happy with their compensation? Well, that's based on the brands they choose to work with. Oftentimes they'll say no if the compensation doesn't align with the effort and the value that they're driving. Other red flags that they shared are, long lead times for approval, navigating brand expectations, and lack of creative freedom, right? So as we're talking specifically about the budget portion, what I would strongly recommend is, don't waste your budget across, 10 different influencers and 10 different topics. Focus it a little bit better, right? Focus on the influencers that drive results. So that means testing on a smaller scale with a few people, seeing which ones are driving the best impact for your organization, and then building something bigger alongside them to get the most out of your budget. But again, if your brand is guilty of any of these, don't worry. We all have been at some point. You're not alone, but it's time for us to fix it. So this is another thing related to the affiliate marketing piece that I mentioned earlier. So if your influencer strategy is asking people to share your brand's content, you're kind of missing the point. We, have had customers that want to work that way. A lot of enterprise companies, in order to get through red tape, prefer to do this as well. But influencers want to co-create content with brands authentically. They don't want to just push promotions. So again, this is a good time for all of us to ask ourselves, are we treating influencers as collaborators or just distribution channels? Because if it's distribution channels, that significantly decreases the number of influencers that are going to be willing to work with you, as well as your opportunity to organically build advocates within the industry. Again, a lot of the bigger named influencers in B2B also do not want to work that way. They don't want to be a mouthpiece for the organization. They want authentic collaboration. So again, just something for us to think about. 87% prefer collaboration over amplification. So I think this is another check-in point for us to be honest, right? Because we're looking at two different sets of data that overlap in some ways, but two different interests, right? So brands are more likely to measure success differently than our influencers do. Influencers care about quality of partnerships, working with brands that align with their values, having enough freedom to speak their own voice. But brands are more concerned with metrics, conversions, ROI, as you should be, right? It is your job. But how do we bridge this gap, right? And that's what we're going to dig into in a little bit. So again, while we know that influencers prefer to be paid for collaboration, the relationship with the brand is very, very important to them as well. So as you can see, these are just a few clips from the actual survey. These are direct quotes from our influencers, and you'll notice some key themes here, right? Authenticity is incredibly important to B2B influencers. There's a lot of feedback around trust, freedom, content that connects with the heart and the head, right? And the ability to use their own voice. So again, these are just things to keep in mind. If your organization isn't willing to allow your influencers at least some creative freedom, allow them to use their authentic voice, which is part of the reason you're going to work with them in the first place, because their audience trusts them. That's just something to think about, right? Maybe you aren't quite ready to do that. So this is a segment of the session that I'm really, really excited about. This is our influencer confessions moment, the protection program unfiltered. And I have to give kudos where kudos is due. This was entirely Ann Hanley's idea. So she thought of it, I made it happen, let's say. We asked a group of influencers, well-known influencers in the industry, to be brutally honest about what brands do that completely kill the relationship. So we have changed their voices and their names have been removed to protect their identities. Please don't mind the terrible AI rendition of their words. But again, these are their exact word for word what they shared exclusively for this webinar. So let's dig into some of their biggest deal breakers.
Working with teams that lack decision-making power is frustrating. The moment someone on their team dislikes something, usually because it's not entirely product-centric, they panic. They don't know how to handle internal pushback, and the entire process stalls.
One of my most frustrating experiences was with a brand that only paid 50% of the agreed amount.
As budgets shrink, brands expect more effort from me. To counter this, I've significantly raised my fees, which helps weed out the problem clients and keeps my workload more manageable. My overall income is lower, but I'm much happier.
Clients often claim they want me to present their messages in my own style, but then they edit and re-edit my work until it no longer sounds like me. The end result is entirely their voice, which defeats the purpose of hiring me in the first place.
Some brands have asked me to go through extensive training, onboarding, background checks, and even financial disclosures just like a new employee. That's absurd. I'm not their employee, and I told them so. I refuse to work with companies that impose these kinds of demands. If anyone asks, I'll just say I turned down an extremely lucrative offer from one of these ridiculous companies.
My biggest turnoff is when a brand doesn't respect me as a partner. They want access to my audience, yet they treat me like an obstacle rather than an asset. This mindset shows up in many ways, like forcing me to mention their brand in the first 3 seconds of a video. It's a bizarre approach to influencer marketing.
Brands often overestimate the value of exposure and their own brand importance, leading to unrealistic expectations and influencer partnerships. Many influencers default to monetary compensation because exposure alone rarely holds measurable value, and contracts often prevent leveraging brand logos. Additionally, brands frequently lack clear objectives and measurement strategies, failing to define whether they seek awareness, engagement, or conversion, each requiring different approaches and costs. The closer an influencer's role is to direct sales, the higher the cost, as success depends on external factors like the brand's sales team and product fit.
It's disappointing when a brand doesn't trust me to communicate their message in a way that will truly resonate with my audience. They don't seem to believe that I actually know how to engage my own followers.
So, I don't know if any of that is shocking to hear for any of you. I'd be curious to know in the chat if those are things maybe that you've heard from other influencers that you have even been guilty of. I'd be, again, curious to know. But if your brand's doing any of these things, and it depends on the influencer, but most of them will walk away. They won't want to work with you or partner with you. So things like micromanaging their content, not paying them fairly, or having late payments, or making the onboarding process a nightmare, or even overestimating the value of exposure instead of real compensation, like we talked about. So if your influencer program isn't working, the problem might not be the influencer, it might be your approach. And these can all be relationship enders before you even get started, before you even get your program off the ground. So that brings us to our next activity, which is, are you making these mistakes? So this is a good opportunity for us to be honest with ourselves. No one else is going to read your workbook if you don't want them to. Are we making any of these mistakes, right? And are there other mistakes maybe that these contributions and, kind of secrets from the influencers have made us think about that we've maybe made in the past or we want to avoid making? So just take a few seconds to highlight which ones you feel like you might be guilty of. Again, there's no grade. It's fine. And again, like Stephanie mentioned, if we don't have time to fill everything out today, we can always watch the recording again, come back later. And there may be other things throughout the webinar that make you kind of want to go back, work through your workbook a little bit more. So now we're going to be talking about the biggest issue, brands and influencers not prioritizing the same things, right? Why do they keep ghosting each other? Why do things keep breaking down? Why aren't they working? So, for example, events are the top priority for influencers in 2025 in terms of where they want to have brand partnerships, where they want to act as an influencer. Meanwhile, brands have said social content is their top priority for 2025. And why is that? For influencers, events provide the opportunity for more exposure and also more compensation, right? So we're asking a lot more of them. They are in person, they're traveling, they're speaking at an event or doing interviews or live coverage, things like that. And it, again, garners more compensation. The reason that brands are focused more on social content is because it can be less risk. So whether it's social content on the influencers' platforms or their own, it's more of a moment in time than it is something that lives on the website. It can also be depending on their access to, do they own the website? Can they publish content on it? Are brand social channels maybe their only option? Another way to sort of get around some of that red tape. Also, again, it tends to cost less money than things like events, webinars, LinkedIn Lives, panel discussions. So there is a bit of a conflict here between influencers and brands and what they're prioritizing in 2025. Another area where there's some misalignment is on exploring new platforms. So there's a lot of reasons that this can be the case, especially in large enterprise or teams that are strapped for resources. The good news about partnering with influencers, though, is that you can test without needing to commit necessarily to a channel. So what does that mean? If your audience is on TikTok or Blue Sky and you aren't quite ready to dip your toe in the water on setting up a new platform, gaining followers, having yet another social profile to figure out what your identity is, what your audience wants on it. If you have influencers that are already present on those platforms and can create content that drives back to your brand or increases your share of voice, those are always options, depending on what it is that you're looking to achieve. So if you want to test to see if a platform might be right for your brand, that's a good way to do it, is to have the influencer publish the content on their piece. So David asked another questions, some examples of B2B influencers in their industries. So again, I want to make sure that this feels valuable and that I'm giving enough information to you so that you can determine what makes the most sense for you. I'd say, again, if you look at healthcare technology, or even let's use cloud computing as an example. So cloud is a very big topic in B2B tech, obviously. You're going to be looking at influencers like Helen Yu, Sally Eves. They are both on kind of the more professional influencer side, but then you also have people like Elias Knauser, who's much more known in smaller circles, but creates really great niche content as more of a sort of, subject matter expert. So again, hopefully that helps give a little bit more clarity to that sort of question. when asking about, Jordan also asked a question about what sort of things influencers are doing in the B2B space, as this is a future potential thing to add. There's a lot of different ways to do this. Again, it can be events and social content like we talked about. It can also be writing blog content, or as simple as your brand reaching out to 5 influencers, asking them to give a prediction for cloud computing in 2025, right? And then your team can package that up as a piece of blog content. Video content, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is also big from both a brand and influencer side. So the options are pretty much limitless. If you think of content, if you think of social, if you think of the white papers and original research and things you already have planned, it's more of a question of how can you incorporate influencers into them to improve the content and to increase your exposure and make it more sticky with your audience. So another thing to think about is, what are some of the other big differences that we found in our survey between brands and influencers? So not surprisingly, many brands want to have more control over the message than an influencer shares. And you'll find that a lot, especially in highly regulated industries. We work quite a bit within insurance and finance, and that's where we tend to see that happen more often than not, just because there are such strict regulations on them as a business, but then their comms teams tend to be a little bit more risk averse as well. So there is this desire to control the message. Influencers, on the other hand, want creative freedom and to share their authentic views. And just to be frank, this is a big hurdle that we need to overcome. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, the right answer is somewhere in the middle, right? So the brands being able to provide influencers with guidelines on, certain topics that are a no-go, certain brands maybe not to mention, but then the influencer being able to share authentically the content that they feel is best suited for their audience, right? And again, if you're paying an influencer, you should be able to weigh in on whether they say something that's damaging to your brand or not, right? And this is something, even within the last few weeks, we've had to have conversations with a few influencers about this sort of thing. And it can be a tough conversation to have, but at the end of the day, you're paying them for the collaboration. And yes, while it needs to be authentic, there also needs to be an element of brand safety involved. And my team goes through a very rigorous process in terms of how we are vetting influencers and checking for these things, especially in I'd call it tough climate right now, at least in the United States. It's something that we really have to be mindful of and be careful of when we're suggesting different influencer partners. Also, not surprising, influencers are more focused on top of funnel metrics, while brands want to manage bottom of the funnel. Why? We all need leads. Every marketer needs leads right now. I don't care if it's in your job description, whether you're a demand gen marketer or not. It's something that is really important to our roles, is our ability to show that business impact. So again, there is a middle ground that we can reach, but again, like I mentioned earlier, that depends on what types of influencers you're partnering with, which types of tactics you're prioritizing. Sort of all of that is all wrapped into whether you can successfully drive leads or not. There's another question specifically around podcasting that I see from Andrea, which we're going to get to in just a second in terms of where that ranks in terms of channels, but great question. And again, a question from Julie on how do you figure out who the real influencers are in a space? So again, it's a combination of different things, right? It's not just do they have the largest network size, but what type of content are they creating? Does it align with your brand point of view and your values? Are other people that are influential mentioning them, or are they just kind of speaking into an echo chamber and all of a sudden you see bots responding to things, right, to up the engagement levels? So it can be difficult sometimes to suss that out. We have a whole team that uses our platform to do it, but there are also a number of other platforms as well. And I'd say do your research, right? If you don't have the money to invest in a platform like Onalytica, make sure that you are looking at multiple sources. So look up an influencer on a specific channel. You can even go to ChatGPT and say, who are the most influential people under this topic, right? And then typically it'll give you references to some of the content that they've created. So you're going to need to vet them. You're going to want to look at content on different platforms as well. Again, some platforms, they may have one voice that aligns very much with your brand. On another platform, it may be something a bit more off the wall that does not align at all. And you want to be kind of aware of their whole ecosystem when you're trying to make a decision whether you want to partner with them or not. So next activity, measuring success. Are you tracking the right metrics? So again, whether you are considering influencer marketing or looking to refine your program, would love for you to jot down some thoughts in your workbook of which metrics you are focused on and whether they align with the areas of the business where you want to have impact. So again, if you are focused on share of voice, perhaps as a primary KPI, but you need to drive leads, is there misalignment there? And Tracy asked a really great question as well around B2B. How are we defining B2B? So is it brands that are connecting with consumers directly, or is it brands selling to other businesses? So typically it's going to be business to business, right? So a SAP selling to, another large enterprise organization to use their software. However, sometimes it can be B2B to C. But most of the time, it isn't any direct to consumer. There will always be a consumer element. Business buyers are consumers, but maybe not in the same way that you'd execute a B2C program. That was a great question. Okay, just one more moment here, and then we will move on. And this is a really important one, so I just want to make sure we leave a little space here to think about this. Okay. Next part that we want to talk about, now all the doom and gloom is over. We've talked about what influencers really think of brands, where influencers and brands are misaligned. We want to spend some time talking about the sweet spot. So where brands and influencers are clicking, where they do align. And the good news is they do align on quite a few things. So one of them being video. So use of video has significantly increased over the past few years. And as of this year, from both of our surveys, they're both in that mid 40%, where they're saying collaborations include video. So again, that could mean short video on social channels. That could be things like a LinkedIn Live. It could be a produced video on a influencer's YouTube channel. It could be a video podcast, all of those sorts of things. And the good news is they're both planning significant increases for 2025. So this is sort of an assessment of what they're currently doing, but both have expressed desire to continue increasing that amount, right? And what is the reason for that? One of the things we know is that a lot of the social algorithms prefer video. They prefer things that keep people in platform versus linking off to other sites. It tends to be more engaging. It can work on multiple different channels depending on how long the video is, how it's produced. So again, videos are also a great way to create other pieces of content, right? So from a single video, you could have content on your website. You could have multiple blog posts. You could have snippets on social. There's a lot of different things that you can do with video, and it's a great way to repurpose content. So I would expect by next year probably to see this in more of the 60%-ish range for both parties. AI. It couldn't be a webinar in today's climate without at least talking about AI a little bit. So is it a real deal? Is it a distraction? Again, it's interesting that both parties are using AI in different ways. So brands are using it for analysis, ID, program measurement, and influencers are using it for market research, audience analytics, which was one I thought was really interesting that we hadn't really heard before, is they're trying to gain a better understanding of their own audience, which is, I think, oftentimes prompted by further requests from brands on what is the makeup of their audience, right? So before I'm going to partner with you, I need to know that you're reaching the right people that I want to reach. So that was a new one we saw this year. And then content ideation. So one area that does overlap is, or two areas actually, is campaign management and content creation. So it could be, drafting content for a contribution on the influencer part, or a brand drafting outreach potentially to the influencer, gathering data on managing that relationship and the flow of the actual campaign. The only thing I'd say about both of these things is that this is an area where we need to be careful. You've heard the warnings before. I'll leave it at that. I think the things that are in their separate bubbles probably are a bit better use of AI. And the things in the middle probably, in my opinion, again, should require more of that human touch. But hey, it's an area of alignment, so it seemed worth bringing up. The next one is a big piece, and I think it's something that a lot of people have asked about, and something that we're all wondering about, especially in B2B, is channel prioritization. So again, these are the channels that both brands and influencers are prioritizing. This is our second year running the survey, and it only keeps improving in terms of alignment. So for B2B, LinkedIn is obviously the place to be. So for the top three, almost the top 5 or 6, both brands and influencers were aligned. Brand website is the second prioritization. And what I mean by brand website is your company website. So housing white papers, blog content, videos, whatever it is on your website, having the influencers contribute to that content, but you owning it on your domain. Podcast was actually number 3. And this does, again, take into consideration audio only or audio plus video podcasts. 9 times out of 10, podcasts are going to be on the influencers' channels, not the brand channels. That's, again, if you are new to podcasting, that is hands down the best way to do it. That way you don't have to build up an audience, get all of the recording equipment, start, running the show, finding people to recruit, invite. Creating a podcast is a lot of work. It can be incredibly effective, but also, again, if you're starting out, doing this on an influencer's channel is probably your best bet, right? And it can be having one of your subject matter experts or executives attend an interview on an influencer's podcast, or it could be sponsoring a podcast, or a combination of those things, which again, we're seeing perform better and better year over year, especially now that we can have access to more data. One thing I will say is X, at least according to these surveys, continues to be deprioritized more every year by both brands and influencers. So last year, I think it ranked in at number 5. This year, it didn't even make the top 6 for either. And I think this aligns well with the conversations we've had with our customers as well as influencers. So our team has made a conscious decision to navigate away from X and focus on LinkedIn in terms of influencer discovery and search, and even some data around performance, and then focusing on podcasts, Instagram. TikTok is another area that we are investing in as well. So this helps us really understand where our influencers and our customers want to prioritize content creation. Again, many brands have completely closed up accounts that had hundreds and thousands of followers. Many influencers have as well. One area where there's a bit of divergence is influencers are more likely to go over to Blue Sky, where there was very few, if any, brands that at least that completed our survey that are focused on that as a channel. So LinkedIn reigns supreme. Like I said, it's the place to be. And I'd be curious to know too, what other, if you are implementing influencer marketing, what other channels you've been focusing on and maybe where you've seen the most success. Okay, I believe this is our last or second, this is our second to last activity in our workbook. We're almost there, I promise. The next question is around scaling up. Where is your biggest opportunity to scale up your program? Knowing what the data says around different priority channels, ways to use AI, different types of content to create, where do you think is your biggest opportunity? We had a good question from Christina. Hi, Christina. She said that she's in a very unique, very niche market. So nonprofit, affordable housing developer. So how, in that sort of situation where you're really niche, do you know if an influencer would even be a good idea for your company? And yes, those, I will agree with you. You're not alone. Those ones are incredibly difficult to find. I'd say you need to identify who the people are that influence who you're trying to reach. So are you looking for fundraising? Are you trying to find people to, donate certain things or participate in joining your team, or what is it, right? So you need to think about who you're trying to influence and what sort of things matter to them. So it might not be someone directly related to your field, but it could be someone adjacent, right? That has influence, that is well known for their ability to fundraise or help, and sorry, this one's a bit of a stumper because I've never had a customer explicitly in this field, but I've had some very adjacent. And I think it's, again, just finding those people that you're trying to influence. Could it be policy makers, local government? And a lot of times it's people that look and sound like them. So if you are trying to reach local government, are there people within local government that you could reach out to, start building a relationship with, do an interview with, because you know that they influence others, right, to help support your cause? So again, that was a really, really interesting question. I'd be happy to connect later and maybe brainstorm that and dig a little bit deeper. But again, there's always an opportunity, I think, for influencers, but it's about finding the right people and doing it in the right way. You got me with that one. That was good. Okay. We're getting nearly there. So our playbook for not sucking at B2B influencer marketing. How do we fix what's broken? How do we get it right? And what does that look like? So these last, kind of few slides, I just want to leave you with some sort of bigger ideas to think about. So invest in long-term partnerships, right? So doing one-off collaborations with influencers and then sort of tossing them aside, moving on to the next one or the next campaign is not the way to do it. And I say that from someone who's been doing this a long time, who's built really great relationships, long-term ones with influencers. You're not going to have the most business impact doing it this way either. So not only are you not going to build those advocates, but they're going to be less likely to want to do more things for you and with you. And the partnership in general just is not going to last very long. You're not going to get the most out of it that you could. Ditch likes and focus on real business outcomes. So again, leads are incredibly important to us, as well as some deeper metrics around, thought leadership, top of funnel, middle funnel, bottom of funnel, but really focus on what those business outcomes are that you need to drive. So if ultimately, you need to drive leads, how do you work backwards to figure out exactly how to do that with a program like this? So your content, your social program, how can it all be aligned to drive that business impact, not just share a voice? And I'm not saying that those types of KPIs aren't still important, but you really need to work your way backwards from what matters most to you and your stakeholders. Pick the right content types for your goals. Again, what aligns with the business goals, not that you want to create an ebook or that you want to do a piece of original research. Like ultimately, before you begin down that content path, determine whether it's going to help you meet those goals that you need to or not. Enhance content, don't replace relationships with AI. So use it, don't abuse it. Again, this is an area where we have to be careful. I'd say especially on influencer outreach, it's just something that does not work well with AI most of the time because it requires that you have an understanding of what drives this person. Is it connection? Is it their ego? Is it simply about, they're simply interested in the amount of money that you need to pay them? So that's something that you should put right up front. It's really understanding these relationships and how best to engage with them. And then on the other side of that, that's sort of on the outreach activation side of working with an influencer. When you're creating your content, you're putting the influencer's words in there. Are you losing something by having AI write the rest of the content for you, right? So it's just, let's use it, but let's be careful and use it in the right way. And then don't be that marketer. So respect the expertise of the influencers that you're working with. Become the type of partner that influencers want to collaborate with. I promise you 100% it is worth the extra bit of effort because the rewards are unlimited, right? Again, this comes from 10 plus years of working with influencers. And I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, those that focus on building a long-term relationship inevitably see better results, better collaborations. You build trust, and it can decrease a lot of headaches and pain later on if you do it the right way. So our very final piece, activity for the day, is just putting this all into action. So again, couple quick seconds to jot down some sort of parting ideas around this before we close up and start taking questions. And I think we're gonna have plenty of questions for the Q&A. There are some really great ones today. All right, action plan. And again, you may want to rewatch the webinar. You may want to go back through your notes that you took throughout. But definitely, I'd say within the next couple of days, while this information is still fresh, think about what your action plan could look like. So I just wanted to thank everyone for attending today. If you are serious about taking your influencer marketing to the next level, I strongly urge you to complete your B2B influencer marketing blueprint. A lot of the inputs we've actually already talked about today, but it's a really good way for you to identify some of the marketing challenges that you need to solve, things that you're looking for in an influencer, types of topics you want to cover, and then our team will put together a custom blueprint for you that is free. So again, strongly encourage people to do that. I know it's also a link in the resources. And then, however, if you want to chat more about what's working for the most successful brands, connect with me via email or on LinkedIn, because as we mentioned, LinkedIn is the place to be. So again, these are all in the resources. Feel free to follow up on them later on. You can always email me. I always love to talk about this.